Hello, and welcome back to Conversations with Zendesk, where we explore how new trends and technology in customer experience are shaping the way that businesses connect with customers. Each week, we speak with customer experience innovators and experts to hear their thoughts and ideas on the future of CX. I'm your host, Nicole Saunders. Last time, we heard from Christina Fonseca, VP of Product for Zendesk's AI division, and learned all about how our tech is evolving. This week, we turn our attention to how some other companies are developing in the space of generative AI. I speak with Deepam Mishra, a senior advisor to AI and machine learning startups and the leader of several advisory programs for startup scaling generative AI and joint innovation at Amazon. In this role, Deepam advises some of the world's leading AI and ML startup founders, as well as enterprise AI leaders, on how to bring artificial intelligence into production. Deepam has over 15 years of leadership experience in startups and large enterprises. He has founded 4 AI and ML startups, was the CEO-founder of Venture Factory, and has had several leadership roles in enterprise innovation. Our conversation is full of all sorts of interesting insights and ideas about generative AI. So let's dive in. Deepam, welcome to Conversations with Zendesk. How are you today?
Great. Thanks for inviting me. Very happy to be here.
Well, I'm so excited to speak with you because you've actually been thinking about AI and working in this space for a long time, probably longer than a lot of people who are getting on the AI hype train more recently. But I would love to have you share a little bit more context about your experience and your background with AI.
I have spent way too many years in and around AI than I care to remember, but it's still passion for me. And it's funny that now people are saying it's the age of AI, even though I've been doing machine learning for a long time. So I started my career as a research scientist at Stanford Research. I was working in machine learning and computer vision. I have had various roles creating my own startups. I founded 4 different machine learning startups, and as well as a small early stage venture fund. And for the last few years, I've been working with big technology firms like Microsoft and now at Amazon, primarily focused on AI and machine learning startups. So that's a quick overview of what I've been up to.
I saw that you recently announced the launch of the AWS Generative AI Accelerator. Tell us about that. What is that all about and what kinds of things are you looking into?
We launched the accelerator just literally yesterday or day before. We were really overwhelmed with the response. The intent was to find the world's best machine learning startups in generative AI and work with them to both help them scale and accelerate fast, while we also learn to see what are the challenges through the eyes of these amazing pioneers, what AWS and Amazon can help to solve. As you probably know, in Amazon, more than 90% of what we build is based on customer feedback. And this is one of our mechanisms to get customer feedback by being part of the journey with them. So the accelerator offers a bit of financial support, a fairly generous $300,000 Amazon credits for building on AWS, as well as it offers, in my opinion, a lot more value. The reason why so many folks have applied is we provide bespoke technical and business mentorship and support to all these startups to help them leverage the Amazon ecosystem. And we have had, as I mentioned, a tremendous response in terms of applications. Even with our best of estimates, we were way oversubscribed, but we're very excited that we've chosen about 21 startups who are participating in all different areas of technology, different industries, different parts of the world, different, I would even say, diversity of founders. It's an amazing cohort and very excited about working with them.
Everybody has been hearing a lot about what OpenAI is working on and what some of the bigger players are, but it sounds like you're seeing a really diverse field of people developing in this space. What are some of the more interesting problems that people are trying to tackle or applications that they're working on?
My work is a lot focused around startups. So I can certainly say that from the startups perspective, the focus has been very wide and pretty much across the board. So then both in terms of diversity of applications, the kinds of technology focus areas, as well as possibly business applications and consumer applications, it's very, very diverse. So I wouldn't say, even in our own accelerator, which I was referring to, we were just discussing this over a dinner, and we feel like there's almost every facet of human life, as well as businesses, all functions of businesses, which are virtually touched by even these 20 odd startups that we're working with. So it's kind of hard to bracket them. The current bit of hype as well as excitement is around doing enterprise search and document analysis in terms of analyzing your data and being able to generate more value out of information, that especially unstructured information like text files, all kinds of logs. Even, for example, in customer service, you all probably record and save a lot of customer feedback. Much of that information can be analyzed. So there's a lot of work happening there. Obviously, in consumer areas, there's also a lot of work in image and video generation for entertainment, for graphics, for game development. It's really fascinating to see the wide areas going on. I think the patterns are still emerging, and probably next 6 or 12 months, we'll see what the highest adopted applications are.
We talk a lot about, obviously, customer service, customer support, how people are finding information. What are some of the other realms that people are thinking about with this? You mentioned a little bit around like AI, image and video generation. Are there any other unique spaces that you think aren't getting talked about as much that are really interesting?
Yeah, it's almost, you can imagine what generative AI does. It just stretches our imagination boundaries. So yes, there are the first few applications I think we will see. People are saying, okay, what we used to do with conventional AI, can we try to do that better with generative AI? So for example, if you had like a chat bot for customer conversation, or you had even some kinds of bots to understand customer feedback, or you had some image analytics bots which could allow you to do kinds of interpretation of different types of image data, you can do a lot better with generative AI. While that is true, I think the real interesting part is net new applications of things which we could not do before, which we could not even imagine before. That's really the fascinating part about generative AI. So like what you mentioned, text to image generation. For example, imagine I show this video in one of my presentations where we're able to generate a simulated video sequence of a water droplet dropping on a surface of water, showing that in slow motion with a background of sunset with a certain color hues and color tones around it. All of that can be done just by somebody's imagination and typing a text script. And you can generate very sophisticated video and imagery from that. We work with one startup, for example, Runway ML, which has just finished running, I think it's the International Film Festival for Generated Images or Videos. It was amazing to see the kind of diversity of work that people presented in that. And it's just a start. I think we will get a lot more exciting applications from generative AI in areas that we probably can't even imagine right now.
That's amazing. I didn't realize that there was enough of it out there right now to actually have a film festival around it. It sounds like it's way further along than maybe people are expecting or aware of right now.
There's still a lot to be done, but yes, it is certainly a lot of experimentation already happening. There are gaps in the technology, as we all know, but folks are doing amazing things. And I would say it's an advanced experimentation stage, but there's a lot of work happening in pretty much all of these areas.
So that brings to mind an interesting point. Right now, we're in the middle of the writer's strike, and they're very concerned about AI replacing them in terms of writing the words and the scripts and the jokes and all of that, which I think is a legitimate concern. Hearing about video getting produced, it sounds like this is something that we're probably going to have to tackle in a variety of fields. Certainly, one of the concerns with AI is, how do you keep the human touch? We talk about it in customer support of how do you make a bot empathetic, but not too empathetic, right? You still want to know that it's a robot and not a person. What are your thoughts on how, as companies are approaching these new technologies, they need to balance this amazing innovation with still keeping it human? And what is that role of the human interaction with it?
I would say I'm probably more of an expert on the technology side of things. I'll say as technologists, we will want to make sure that we provide both the tools to allow creators to experiment and arrive at the right mix of human and computer generated content, but also help them address one of the bigger concerns that most companies developing in this or businesses trying to adopt this is not understanding how the technology works. So being able to understand a bit more about nature of generative AI tools, how they produce what they produce. And hence, once you understand better, you can control better, you can optimize better. So things like explainability in generative AI is a industry challenge. Being able to control the kind of content that you can produce, both from a perspective of what you mentioned as human versus technology generated content, but also from perspectives of copyrights, of original content. These are all very important questions. And as technologists, what we are looking at solving is building those guardrails and those types of tools that allow developers and generators to have more control of these systems. Ultimately, I think people who are far more experienced in each of those areas of creation will decide, and probably some industry groups and others will come together to decide what's the right balance. I personally, in my own personal opinion, is human creativity keeps getting better every time a new technology comes around. Just that humans tend to want to create more things than, or maybe higher value added things than they were doing maybe a few years ago. So I tend to take that perspective. But from a technology perspective, I'm very keen on helping creators get control and more insights into what they're developing.
I love that you bring up how creative humans are and how human creativity keeps evolving. It feels like there's a lot of fear about how these technologies are going to take over what we do. But I think some of the real excitement is in what it's going to enable us to do that we can't even imagine today. For example, when Twitter first was a thing and people had to start composing in these like short snippets, and there were all sorts of new memes for one, but ways that people communicated things and creative things people did with those limitations. So it'll be really interesting to see where generative AI takes us and what new things come out of that as well. I think it's important that we balance having an awareness about the concerns with the really cool things that could happen. So to that end, I know something that you have thought a lot about is what is just hype and what is actually really interesting and really the meat of what is going on in AI right now. So what is your take on that?
I wouldn't call myself as a soothsayer and be able to predict what things will be. This technology is moving so fast, and every day we are ourselves learning. So, got to be humble about where the direction the technology can take. But I would certainly say some of the fears are little overblown in terms of not being able to control the output and outcomes of these technologies. Like always, some concerns are real about certain types of jobs getting impacted. I would think, like always, technology tries to first automate and eliminate those tasks which are lesser value add or probably more repeatable. So that, I think, is generative AI is probably no exception, likely to happen in some areas. But I also feel some of the things that people are expecting to happen are probably too complex for technologies to be able to deliver automatically right now. So for example, even customer service jobs or providing that human touch in a content creation or any form of artistic expression or any kind of human to human engagement, what makes us human is a bit of that touch, which I think we will always want to retain. That's my personal perspective. But I'm also more excited about seeing there's lots of new types of jobs and opportunities getting created. So for example, I've seen some startups just recently. One startup is helping you create content on demand for, like, for example, this is the next level up of streaming content and entertainment where you have so much to choose from. You're probably overwhelmed today if you're looking at Netflix trying to decide what to watch this evening. You can probably now think about content creation happening, which is very customized to your liking. So if your solution system can put together a milieu of content which is customized just for your watching or entertainment, or depending on what mood you are in, what time of the day you are in, and just different ways of organizing content which could not be done before, very high customized for each individual user or viewer. So the kind of personalization and the kind of possible content generation for that kind of deep personalization is a completely new set of experiences startups and other companies are going to try to create. On terms of the reality where I think a lot of business investment is going on, I think there is far too much focus perhaps on the entertainment side because most people understand it. But in terms of the businesses, what I'm seeing is businesses have so much of data and content which has not been used in the past. I see a lot of investment going in, a lot of interest going in, trying to understand how to get value out of that data. Just a very simple statistic. There's no way to verify these numbers, but somebody in a panel said roughly 70%, I think it's probably closer to 80 or 90% of information is in most companies is in the form of text and other documents. Only 10-15% is in terms of numbers, which we can actually analyze in your Excel spreadsheets and other kinds of spreadsheets. And right now, there's literally no way to analyze that 70 to 90% of information easily without generative AI. So we have so much information still sitting unused in businesses and corporations, which I think is the real hot topic right now in terms of business investments. And I'm seeing that likely to be one of the first and the bigger adopters of generative technology in the near future.
I am all for anything that reduces the number of hours we spend scrolling through Netflix menus and Hulu menus and all of those kinds of things on the weekends. I would love something that helps us find things that we want more. It is interesting to think about how jobs will be evolving. And I think there's been a lot of talk about how there's going to be new skill sets brought into jobs, right? Those of us in the marketing space, learning how to write prompts and work with AI. But you're right, there's also going to be a whole new category of jobs for people working in this space. Your point about text analysis is really interesting too. You know, my career has been largely in the online community space. And one of the challenges that has always faced us is how do we take 10,000 community posts and summarize the themes of those, right? And it's mostly happened through like meta tags or literally teams sitting down with, a big box of donuts and reading through 1,000 posts and writing down what they think it's about and sort of doing like an audit to get those themes. And so you're right that there's so much valuable information that we will be able to better leverage and better utilize once we're able to use these technologies to help us identify those trends, understand it, do all of that reading for us, and help us figure out the themes that we can then take action on. If there's anything we've seen with development of technologies in the past 10 years, it can go in a wildly different direction than we expect. So then let's take a look backwards in time. Because you've been in this space so long, let's just even time box it to about a year or two, because I know that AI has come into popular awareness really this year with some of the release of Chat GPT and things. Where were we just a year or two ago in this space, and what's different now? What's the evolution that you've seen in the recent past?
That's a great question. And we tend to forget AI has been around. Even Amazon has been doing machine learning for 20 odd years. In fact, I would say almost everything that Amazon does, there is machine learning involved in it. Machine learning again, I don't want to get too much in the technology side of the discussion, but generative AI is really a subset of, I would say, the set of machine learning, or even larger beyond that is artificial intelligence. So we've been talking artificial intelligence in the 1950s, but as you rightly said, the hype cycle, or rather the interest of generative AI has captured the average user across all age spectrums across the globe. And that's because, in my opinion, it has become easier for people to use AI in the last maybe 6 to 9 months. That's the more power that we have been able to put behind these machine learning models, it has made the front end and the engagement model with human operators that much simpler. Now, it comes with its own set of challenges, which we can talk about separately, but the big change has been just the size of the machine learning models, just the raw horsepower of computes, and the amount of data that we are now using to train these large generative AI models, which are also known as foundation models. That's just unprecedented. And it's grown by orders of magnitude. Just by, if you look at last 3 or 4 years, the first, what I would call large language models, even 4 years ago were about 300, when the BERT models were probably around several tens of millions or hundreds of millions of parameters. And in the last year and a half, we've gone from the GPT-3, which was about 175 billion, to some models released this year, I think from the open source community, as well as probably from some private providers, which have more than 1 trillion parameters. So the size of these models has grown exponentially. And
yeah, it's huge.
Yeah, that's huge. And what it does is, the way I explain to people is, the number of parameters is just directly proportional to how many patterns the system can understand. And it's at the end of the day, machine learning is primarily a technology of understanding patterns between input data and output data, and then being able to match those patterns on unseen data. And this is how you solve problems which are not easy to solve using simple mathematics and simple reasoning. So as the number of these parameters has grown, so has been the ability to see patterns which are very, very sophisticated and complicated, all the way to the point that I believe the systems are now beginning to understand the patterns of how humans think, which is ultimately what generalized intelligence is going to be sometime in the future. But how poets write poetry, how artists actually create art, how software programmers create software. It's not just what they create, but how they create. Those kinds of deep-seated patterns have now become within the realm of reach of these technologies. So that's the wow factor. Is wow, people are saying, wow, I could not imagine you can ask the system to write a poetry in a certain genre or a certain language in such a short period of time. And that's primarily because these systems have become so much more powerful.
And I think that idea of these machines understanding how human thought processes work, that's both the wow factor and the thing that kind of makes everybody's skin crawl a little, makes everybody go, oh, I don't know how I feel about a machine understanding how I think and how I make decisions. But of course, that is the power. It's that double-edged blade, right? So you mentioned that there are some challenges with so many more people having access to these tools. Let's unpack that a little bit. What are some of the things that you're seeing? What are those challenges that people are facing with that?
Yeah. So first is that the ability to understand what we just said is ability to understand the way humans think. That's not quite perfect at all. In fact, far from it. I think we're just starting seeing the early signs of it. It's not, these systems are still at some level are imitating information patterns that they've been trained on, and they're not yet generating completely new patterns, at least in my opinion. And there are lots of imperfections in terms of the patterns that they measure as well. So just because a machine suggests that a certain type of pattern doesn't mean the pattern is true or real. So there are lots of, which is the famous hallucination issue that people talk about with these large models, is that some of these answers and responses look completely made up. Sometimes they are, and hence they're not accurate for certain types of business applications. So there's a lot of accuracy challenges. I would say that's probably one of the biggest challenges in these systems, is how do you control and understand what is accurate? And then there are other issues from a business perspective, of course, which will include things like data privacy. And we've heard about, people inadvertently leaking corporate data, not knowing that these systems are able to do that. Also, we talked a little bit earlier about intellectual property rights. And there are open questions about who owns the intellectual property. If the system was trained on proprietary knowledge and it generates new knowledge or new information, who owns that new information? And so these are human questions that we have to also understand before commerce can actually flourish around these technologies. But I would say those are the major issues about accuracy and data, and probably a bit around ownership of information. Those are the big sticking points.
The only one that I might add to that is also that question about the data sets that these things are getting trained on, right? And we've seen those examples of like the Twitter AI that became racist really quickly because it was being trained on the whole of what was out there on Twitter already. And so I'm really interested in how can we start to train these models in a way that helps us ideally work some of those things out of the system and does try to create a more objective language model and things like that. I don't know if you've seen anything going on in that space, but I think that that's a big challenge too.
No, you're absolutely right. I think like all technology, all new technology, there are people who will try to exploit unethical uses with that technology. And I'm sure generative is no exception. And as the technology becomes more powerful, policing it and controlling it probably requires more powerful tools as well. So clearly it's an area of concern overall. As technologists, again, from an innovator's perspective, what I'm excited to see, there are, for example, even in our own accelerator recently, we have one or two startups which are primarily focusing on predicting, on being able to measure which content is generated versus original, human created. And so you'll see technology, it's a cat and mouse game, technology being the police of the technology itself. And they're always probably going to be, this has been going on in AI for a while. It's not new. AI solutions and systems for doing what we call AI monitoring or AI explainability or AI predictability are a very important area of research and development for the last several years. And I think we will continue to see a lot of that. But of course, like many things, the solutions are not just technological, require maybe a combination of us coming together as a society to figure out ways to control it and putting some processes and checks and balances and how we can not fall prey to every piece of information that we get. Today, even now on internet, people ask me, how are you going to control all this misinformation that could be generated rapidly? And one of my responses is, even today on internet, there's a lot of information which is not real. And we can search and find all kinds of information. If you keep digging deeper in your search list, you will find information. But as humans, we've learned to trust and not trust. I think all that experience is what we will develop in the next several years. And how do you put those kinds of experience guardrails and technology guardrails around generative AI?
Well, I'm very glad to hear that there are companies that are working on these monitoring systems and tools to manage the tools. I've been thinking about this a lot, of course, with my background in community management, which obviously there's a heavy bent of that, which is content moderation. One of the questions that's come up for me is, what is it going to mean if I'm in an online community where we can't tell what content is generated by a human and what is generated by AI? And so I've been like, I need watermarks on that content or some kind of tag so I can tell. I also need moderation tools that can help me identify what is legitimate and what maybe isn't. I mean, we struggle with that today with spam bots, and I can only imagine that getting so much more complex. And so I think it will be really interesting to see how those kinds of regulatory and moderating and alerting tools come into play in a whole variety of spaces. On the flip side, always bringing it back to the positive, I think that there's some real opportunities for generative AI to help conversation. For example, I see we're a global company, and I see customers who maybe English isn't their first language sometimes struggle to engage in those conversations as effectively as they could if they could write a little prompt and then say, okay, ChatGPT, expand on this, or help me describe this idea to people who are native English speakers. And so I think that there's actually a real opportunity for increased engagement that is facilitated through some of those tools in AI. So it's not all bad, for sure.
Absolutely. I would say that there are far more positives and interesting areas than probably people have yet imagined. And for example, just in the communication side, I think what generative technology, especially large language models for text, in my opinion, one of the big things they do is they help create a revolution of sorts in communication, the depth of communication and engagement add-on support systems. Like for example, if we have a call, a lot of the time we spend is just making notes or trying to remember what we talked about, and that distracts from the conversation itself. So if also sometimes we come prepared for conversations and we are listening to a few things, but the other person may have some other areas of interest and he or she may express, and we may completely miss that because of our limited ability to focus on a few things at a time or make notes and remember a few things at a time. I think the fascinating part about that, in my opinion, is take a customer conversation or take a human-to-human conversation, for example. These types of support systems can help enrich and unburden us from a lot of the things that we probably end up spending time instead of just focusing on the human interaction. Of course, if we have to be disciplined about how we use these tools, but I can certainly, for example, a startup that I recently met is solving the problem I think you alluded to earlier. They look at your thousands and thousands of social media feedback for product users and comments on the internet just to analyze patterns on what is the next set of features that the product manager should provide, or which of the features, if they've changed a feature, which is being appreciated in the market or not really going down the same way they planned. And those types of signals would require, so long just to read those comments. And frankly, most of the information is often not reviewed and analyzed. Now you can imagine the job of these product managers or even the social media managers significantly more fun and being able to find patterns instead of just reading documents and putting through countless hours in this. So yeah, I think you're right. I think very many new innovative opportunities and more fun opportunities are likely to emerge as well.
It is so important to remember that these technologies are going to enable a lot of us to hopefully get rid of or minimize the mundane parts of the job and really dig into the parts that are more meaningful. What do you think is unique to the startups that are developing as compared to some of the big companies? Because I think everybody's heard about some of these larger organizations starting to implement this stuff, but what is unique to the startup space, and what capabilities and opportunities do they have?
The big difference in startups and the large companies is one of, well, of course, speed, but also risk-taking ability. Bigger companies have a lot more fiduciary responsibility around data. It's not that startups are reckless, but they have less worries about losing data because many of them don't have proprietary data to begin with. They're just trying to start a new process, a new application. They're also much more disruptive in their thinking about changing ways. So the startups are faster to come up with ideas and experiment ideas, which probably larger companies will evaluate a little bit more longer and assess. Although I would say that the pace of innovation with generative AI and AI in general has really accelerated everywhere. It's not just the startups. I think that's one of the challenges even startups have, is even bigger companies are able to move almost as fast if they're focused in catching up with any areas. But what I'm seeing in terms of startups is very many creative experiments on very point specific problems on sharp specific areas. A lot of the old SaaS companies or rather SaaS product models are being experimented with very rapidly. So if you had, for example, an email tool or a chat tool or a video calling tool, or even in types of a business application, you had something to manage your finances or accounting or HR communications. A lot of startups are just jumping in and saying, can I make that better by adding generative AI to it? Can I make that task so much faster and more fun or much more accurate or exciting? So I think we're seeing a flurry of startups who are jumping in, trying to take all of the SaaS type products that we had built in the last 10 to 20 years, or even longer, and trying to reimagine them with generative AI applications. That's kind of one of the big things. And then in the creative world, I'm seeing a lot of new startups coming out in various different areas of creative engagement. Everything, like we mentioned, movie creation is just one, but gaming is another very exciting area in which a lot of startups, and the amount of effort it required to build these games, especially with different types of avatars and textures and context, it simplifies the task for individual game developers to build these types of advanced capabilities much faster. So we're seeing a lot of focus going on there as well. So yeah, I would say in general, it's just faster experimentation and areas which have not yet been explored. I think startups are really swarming into those areas.
Well, it's going to be so exciting to see what they come up with. And now you've got me motivated. I want to talk to somebody in the gaming space and hear all about the development going on over there. All right, last question. What has been the most fun or interesting thing that you've gotten to play with in the AI space so far, if you can pick one?
Well, I'm a bit of a geek. I've seen many exciting and interesting entertainment applications, which as a consumer, I enjoy. But one thing I feel is quite mind-bending, in my opinion, is how we as users of technology is likely to fundamentally change, in the sense that we used to have to be trained on using different software tools, and we had to learn how a particular software tool worked in order to become an expert on that tool, and hence perhaps on that job or that kind of functional role inside a company. So even if I'm a creator, I have to learn maybe a design tool, or I have to learn, and there's a lot of work required and learning curves. I think that's being flipped around. We can have very simple chat interfaces, much like a search or a chat bot, and we can just ask the chat bot to give us the answers or create whatever we want. We don't have to worry about going after menus and menus of options and learning the steps of running a particular software. How do you write a SQL query to generate a graph from a database? How do you produce software by learning Python and Java separately? You can do a lot of that just by simple English as an interface. So the power of human productivity and the ability to engage with technology, I think, is getting transformed. And to me, it's just probably a singularity moment in how I think humans have used technology. That's likely to be something that we'll look back and say our user experiences and interfaces were so primitive going back a few years.
Gosh, I wish I had started with that question. There's so much in there. It is so cool to hear that because I know how many times I've looked at technology and been like, I don't want to learn this whole interface. I wish I could just enter into a chat bot or a search widget. Here's what I'm trying to do. Can you make that function go? And it sounds like that is going to become increasingly the way that we're able to interact with technology. And hopefully that will accelerate adoption rates of different kinds of software too, because people won't have to go through all of this
Absolutely
extended learning to be able to utilize the really powerful tools that companies are providing.
Absolutely. And think about all those non-technical folks like doctors who, like my dad was a doctor, he was using technology. He only used the minimum amount he can get away with. And we subject our physicians to writing notes and looking up medical records before they can see patients. And they're being forced to learn tools that they don't really want to learn. And I'm sure that's the case with many, many areas of work. And how much fun it is that technology disappears behind a chatbot. I think that's probably where we are headed. I think that's ultimately what I feel is the communication revolution, or the discussion and the way we communicate with technology and communicate with each other is going to get so much simplified that we are not going to be slaves to a particular product, a feature, or a technology set, but we will have more control in a much more natural communication process that we're used to.
Well, that shines a very bright light on the future. So I think that we should leave it there and end on a positive note. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really enjoyed this conversation and look forward to picking your brain more in the future and hearing about where things are at a year from now.
Yes, wish I could tell you more, but I'm just as excited to see where things will be in a year from now. And thanks again for having me. Appreciate it.
I am so excited to hear what some of these startups that Deepam was talking about end up developing. It is such an exciting time to be innovating in the generative AI space. Next time, we'll be talking with Ian Hunt, Director of Customer Services and Procurement for Liberty London, which is one of the oldest luxury retail stores in London. He'll talk with us about the evolution of going from being a brick and mortar retailer to moving into a combined physical and digital space. Should be some stories that we can all relate to as our worlds have moved ever more online, and there'll be some great takeaways about how to approach that evolution as a business. Until then, please be sure to like and subscribe to the podcast and tell a friend if you're enjoying it. If you want to connect with other Zendesk users, you can head to usergroups.zendesk.com to see about all of our upcoming user group events, community webinars, and more. I hope to see you around the Zendesk community soon. Until next time, I'm Nicole Saunders for Zendesk, the intelligent heart of customer experience.